Wait, you gotta wait for the clerk to get you going here.
Tell me when.
You gotta use your microphone. Pull that thing right over to you.
Me and Mike's just don't get
With
along.
the chair, man. What do you do in court? You must speak up in court.
When I'm on stage or in court, I know enough to project.
Okay, you can go now.
Okay. It's 6 o'clock. On Monday, March 26, 2018. I'm calling the meeting of the Public Works Committee to order. Present are Mark Haynes and myself, the interim chair, David Bounds, the clerk, and the city manager. So, we're here to discuss retaining walls and driveway cuts, at least for the interim. So I'm going to let you lead off this thing, Wes, and fill us in on what your requests are.
Okay. Basically, what we're trying to do is get some organization to a couple of programs that we support the residents with, so they understand what's going on and they understand what money is available for it. The first one is the City of Laconia retaining wall policy. If you drive around the city, you'll see there are two types of retaining wall. Those that really are up against the road supporting something on the house, whether it's their landscaping, their house itself, their walk, or something. And then there's those that are in the right-of-way that look like they are supporting the right-of-way. The road's elevated and that retaining wall is there. So we've developed a policy to account for both of those circumstances, and I'll explain it as we go through. We've got a lot of new ones come in. Basically anything from last year, if someone wants to put a new retaining wall in, we have them sign an encroachment agreement saying they're responsible for that retaining wall. We're just allowing you to be in the right-of-way. If we need to move it or need to have it moved at any time, you're responsible for moving it. Same thing has happened in regards to when developers come in. If they need a retaining wall in the right-of-way to make their development work, it's their responsibility at that point. The real problems is with the ones that have existed for a long time. In certain circumstances, we know the history behind it. In other circumstances, we don't. We don't know if the retaining wall was put there in support of the house construction or the business construction, or is in support of the road. So we've developed a SOP to take into account both pieces to it. I'm going to spend most of my time focusing on those existing retaining walls. If you go to page 2, what we've tried to do on it is basically say, this is the program, and for those that are in the right-of-way, we will pick up 50% of the cost if we have to hire a contractor to do it. Sometimes we can do it in-house, sometimes we can't. The owner picks up the other 50%, and if it's a case of one that is supporting something that they own, then at the end of that project, they basically sign an encroachment agreement. They know it's their responsibility from there on. So anything after that date, they have to maintain it. They have to replace it if necessary in the future, and if we need to move it or have it moved for some project that we're doing, then it's their responsibility at that point.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Suppose you're dealing with a private citizen, and the retaining wall is on their property, but it's failing, so we're going to help them fix it, right?
It has to be either on the boundary or within the right-of-way.
Okay. If it's
Okay.
entirely on their property,
It's their responsibility.
what if it poses some kind of a threat to the city?
Generally, I've not found one yet where it's totally on their property. Most of the ones that I've found, they're actually, they're retaining walls right on the boundary. And of course, the boundary is a thin line going through, and you have this, I'll say, 2 foot, maybe 3 foot wide retaining wall. So that's where the issue really comes up, is who owns it, because it's on the boundary.
Okay. So you don't anticipate that we'll have an issue where a retaining wall is completely on private property that won't pose some kind of a threat to the city of Laconia?
I have not found one yet, and anything that's new that's being installed is being installed with an encroachment agreement, or if it's part of development, it's being installed with the condition, understanding that they're responsible for it.
Do you think we ought to adopt a policy anyway in the event we discover a wall that poses some kind of a threat?
We can.
Particularly to pedestrians.
Yeah, the wall collapsing on the sidewalk, you know? I'm glad that we're not facing that problem, but I think we ought to have a policy in place that addresses that contingency.
We can.
Okay.
You'll find most of the ones that we found right now are, for the most part, if they're good examples, the one that support our road is like the one on Union Avenue between Elm and Irwin Marine. That one is right on the property line, sort of swings back and forth. Then we have another one on Girard Street that is a portion on the property line. And then we have a few on North Street and Dolph Gilbert area that we have.
Any on Elm Street?
Yes, you do, but for the ones I've seen, mostly on Elm Street, are all ones that support
Okay,
their property, not our right of way.
okay.
Excuse me, Wes, when you say right-of-way, I'm assuming it's 10 feet?
You can't, because every right of way is different.
Okay.
I would say generally it's the edge of sidewalk, but that's not necessarily true in some circumstances.
Okay.
In Court Street, we're working right now because some of the sidewalk is actually outside of the right of way. So at the end of that, we've got to have all easements with the property owners as we go through.
And suppose we have the situation where we need a private contractor, and I'll just use a ballpark figure, or just a pretend figure, and it's gonna cost $5,000. And we're gonna shoulder $2,500, and we're gonna ask the property owner to shoulder $2,500, and they simply don't have $2,500 to contribute. I assume there's some way we could work out payments with taxes. I don't know how you do that, but
We would probably look at those on a case-by-case basis and maybe structure something with a agreed-upon lien against the property, like along the lines of maybe a betterment district, but it might be a district of one type of thing. So we may be able to structure something. There's opportunities to abate people's taxes under a hardship case, and then the taxes get caught up when the property changes hands. There's potential maybe to look at something like that with an individual agreement in a hardship type of scenario, where there's benefit to the city at the same time.
do we, I'm not saying we have to, and I'm just asking the question, does that need to be part of the policy, or we'll just deal with that on a case-by-case basis?
I think probably more of a case-by-case. I think sometimes if you put that out there too much and offer that it's available, you might have a lot of people seeking it, and it opens up a Pandora's box a little bit. But I think reasonably, if there's a situation that we identify that someone doesn't have the means to do something, staff can bring it, and we can usually try to find a way to be a little bit creative there and still protect the city's interest.
Okay. Okay, I've asked enough questions for the time being.
Then there's the circumstance where we can do it in-house with our own labor.
Yeah.
And in that condition, the recommend is that it's a 30% city share at that point, because we're putting our labor into the retaining wall to build it at that point. So we would have 30% of the cost, the homeowner would have 70% cost, and we're doing the work in-house.
When you say 30% of the materials involved?
Correct.
And we would provide the labor plus
We
30%
provide-
of
yes.
the
You're
materials?
not talking about charging them for labor, right?
No, 30%
Just for
of the materials.
Just for the materials, and we do the work.
Yes,
And that, you think is 70-30 is a fair split?
I believe so.
Okay.
Because most of this time, a lot of it's going to be labor on it. Let's see. At the end, like we've already discussed, for these type of retaining walls, the property owner is responsible for the retaining wall at that point. We've solved who owns it as part of this process. The other piece is really the exceptions. And there's a couple different types. Those are the ones that are on the line, they support our road, and they're old. We don't necessarily know who built them. In this particular case, what we're thinking of is a 50% split on the cost, but that's in a case where we don't sign an encroachment agreement, because it's protecting our road, and we don't really know if it was, and I'll use the Union Street example. We don't know if we built it to support our road or the railroad built it to make a flat area to put their railroad tracks in. That's the condition and the problems that we experience. So that's what we're looking at from that standpoint. And there's one different exception that we have where the retaining wall is supporting our road to an extent and supporting private property to an extent. And the way, and you'll see it, is the way the meltwater comes from the wintertime. All the water and all the salt comes through, and right now we don't have drainage. It goes over the retaining wall, and it's effectively our salt water that's causing the concrete retaining wall to erode. In that particular case, we would still do the 50-50 split for anything that's within the right-of-way. We would not have them sign an encroachment agreement. As part of it, we would pick up 100% of the cost for anything that we need to do from a drainage standpoint to alleviate that problem. That's what I'm looking at from that standpoint.
There aren't a whole lot of retaining walls that fit that criteria, right?
I know of one in the city on Girard Street. I haven't checked it, but there's a couple on Gilbert Street as you're going down towards Pine that I think may be in the same boat, but I'm not 100% sure because I haven't gotten permission to walk on their property yet to look at the retaining walls.
Okay.
Not asking for a decision tonight, but it's really to start the process of thinking, get your guidance so I can keep developing the retaining wall policy.
So to boil it down, on anything that the city doesn't have a strong vested interest in protecting our infrastructure, it'd be a one-time 50-50 split or a 30-70 if we're providing the labor. Where we do have an ongoing vested interest, we would do the 50-50 split, but we wouldn't have the encroachment agreement signed, so we would continue to honor that 50-50 going forward. And on areas that we may be causing the issue in a drainage or a runoff type of thing, we'd still do the 50-50 split on the wall, but we would pick up the cost of whatever the other infrastructure repair might be needed to help cure that.
Yes. And all this, of course, is subject to available funding. Right now, the retaining wall money that I get for this program is actually retaining walls, guardrails, and fences. So it depends upon how much money that we have available at the time, you know, whether I can do it that year or we put them on a waiting list. Questions on that? Okay.
So you're looking to do this as I understand it, as a policy change?
Correct.
So help me out here. If the committee were going to vote to recommend this, would we just reference the City of Laconia retaining wall policy that's attached to this in terms of, for the city council?
Right. What I do is if, once we came to agreement exactly how it looked like, it'd be just like what we did for the policy for building on private roads and for emergency lanes. We would put together a packet that would go back to city council and ask the council to approve the attached policy.
So you wouldn't be looking for the city council to do anything tonight?
No.
Okay.
I'm just looking to get your feedback, so whatever we come in from here, I can change the documentation and bring it back for the next.
And let me be a little selfish here. Does that mean we have to have another meeting?
Depends. I could actually put this together, staff it out. If the committee agrees with it at that point, we could probably meet like 10 minutes before it and say, you agree, and we can send it to the council.
Or, I mean, if there's strong consensus that this is going to be the policy and we just wordsmith it into the proper format, you may be comfortable with that tonight. If there's enough nuances that you want to see a revision to it before it gets published in the full council agenda, then we can certainly handle it with a brief meeting just to piggyback on another meeting night.
I guess we're looking at one change anyway in
Right.
terms of the policy itself, so. We can figure out whether we need another meeting or not.
If they do the wordsmithing, can't they just send it to us electronically and we review it?
Sure, and we can, and basically, we don't want to get into a meeting outside of a public meeting, but we can say, here's the document. If you have any concerns with how it's done, please respond back to me. And then if there's no concerns, then we go ahead and move it forward.
Probably the easiest way to do it is to schedule a meeting 15 minutes before the regular council meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm not bonded to that. Okay.
Okay. Next one is a more interesting one. We're getting a lot of requests that sort of peaked towards the end of last year of people asking us to widen their openings on their private driveways in their single-family homes. Sometimes it's a duplex to make it wider so they can park more cars in there.
Want no tissues?
We're really talking the urban core area. I know of 3 requests that I had in the last 2 months of last year where they wanted us to get rid of the granite curbs that we have, widen it up so they can fit 2 or 3 cars side by side into their driveway. Not part of the issue behind that, I wasn't quite sure what the council wants to do in regards to keeping the urban core looking the way it is. Do you want to start allowing the driveways to widen out in front of the houses? I mean, we already have some degree, I just don't know if we want to keep that process. So this policy, the whole purpose of it is to try to get feedback from you and the council in regards to what we want to do for all these expansion requests where they want to make their driveways wider to be able to park more cars. Probably the critical element of it is when you look at the zoning regulations for a single-family home or a duplex, the only zoning regulation basically has to do with the length of the driveway from, and it doesn't say what it is, it just says it's got to be either 25 feet if it doesn't have a garage, or 19 feet from something. What I'm trying to do is make sure we know what that something is, and I'm proposing it to be the right-of-way. So just to refine what's already in the existing zoning regulations, we would say lengthwise, if you're building or modifying your driveway or want to put in a garage, it's got to be either 19 or 25 feet away from the right-of-way. That way, if sometime in the future we want to expand the right-of-way for either sidewalks or whatever, we have the room to do it, and there's enough room for parking for the private property.
And that's at a minimum.
That's the minimum.
Yeah.
The other piece to the side is how wide do we want it? Looking at it from the standpoint of what we have in zoning regulations as it applies to other properties, I've sort of took that and modified it to a degree to apply to single family and duplexes. So if you look at underneath first page, the 4B, what it says from a policy standpoint, the property owner would be responsible for the total cost of modifying the street and the curb if they want to widen it, and we allow them to widen it. The minimum length of the residential driveway would be measured from the city's right-of-way, and curb cuts for that driveway, if they do modify it, will not be cut vertically. So you won't have a sharp edge that someone could fall against. They would have to be a tip down, or when they do it, they'd have to cut it so that it's a gradual slope onto the curb and won't provide a hazard to anybody. The other piece, it directs me to look at the sight lines from the standpoint of, if we do widen it, does it create a safety hazard that we don't want to do? I have one property owner that I've been working with who built a garage right beside a fence on a playground, that if he comes out and puts a driveway from that garage straight back, basically there is no sight distance between as he's backing out and where children and pedestrians are walking on the sidewalk. So that's one of the things that I have been doing at this point, preventing that, but this makes it official from that standpoint. It says we consider sight lines and safety for pedestrians, bicyclists, and motoring public as part of this process. One piece, of course, we are in New England, so the element is where does the property owner plan to do his snow storage? Because if we do let them change something so it's abutting a property line, they could be setting themselves for plowing over into their neighbors and creating neighbor on neighbor disputes that we don't want to get into. But the key piece is for driveway entrances that are limited to one for a single or duplex family, they'll be limited to one driveway. If the property is with some exceptions, if the property is on a corner lot and you have enough room in both corners to be able to have safely 2 driveways, you have enough sight distance, enough distance from the stop line, they can do it, then they could have one in each street. Or if the lot's wide enough where you could safely see from a sight line distance both driveways as a car is coming down, they could have 2. The single-family residential driveways will not exceed 16 feet in width at the intersection with the right-of-way and will not be constructed such that the edge of the driveway crosses a line parallel to the driveway drawn from the side of the house closest to the driveway. Simplest way to think of it is if they want to make their driveway wide enough that it's now in front of the house instead of being, beside the front of the house, then we don't really want that to happen. Did I make that?
The language is a
Little language is little, but
little awkward.
from that standpoint, but the concept is there. You know, most places will have a garage off to the side.
Yeah.
So your driveway comes straight into the garage. We don't want the width of the driveway to get to the point where it's starting to get in front of the house portion, not the garage portion of the property.
Thought about ways to massage that language,
I'll,
make it a
yes,
little clearer.
I'm sitting down with Dean for that one so we can put that in sort of similar to the zoning language.
Okay.
Okay. That was a hard one to come up with, but that's what we're trying to do.
Basically, you don't want people cutting across the front of their house to get to the driveway.
Correct.
All right.
Yeah. Let's see. The other aspect to it is for those ones that was a former single family and went to a duplex and they need more parking, what we're saying is the driveway access shall be a minimum of 12 feet, a maximum of 16 feet. And then on a duplex driveway, you could have a case where they've got a driveway on either side of the duplex. In that particular case, either side can't exceed 16 feet. And if it's one where they have a shared driveway to sort of a parking area behind the duplex, it couldn't exceed 20 feet in width. So it'd be enough room for two cars to easily pass as they go by.
Under that scenario, Wes, where you're limiting between 12 and 16, that's just where it cuts or connects with the
Where
right
it connects with the
of way.
right of way.
So if you had 12 or 16 and then deeper in the property, it were to taper
could-
back, we're not
yes.
precluding
Yeah.
that from occurring with somebody.
Yeah, we're
It's just down at that curve, at the
just at the
right
right of way line. Not at the curb line, but the right of way.
away. And that's partly to control number of places that cars can come out
Out
for,
of,
again, for
correct.
safety reasons, again.
Yeah, what we're trying to do is so that only one car can back out at a time. You're not having two back out and they see the first one and the second one can't see over the first one to look up and down the street. That's really what the concept is. So basically, it's totally the responsibility of the property owner paying for the work. City's not going to pick up any cost for it. And it's really just controlling the width of the driveway at the right of way and preventing any of the driveways from starting to encroach in front of the property.
So we're limiting the width at the right-of-way, right?
Correct.
That doesn't limit, they can expand or narrow down that driveway as they enter into their own
Correct.
property?
The only thing that would be limiting to is if they want to expand it in width beyond the right-of-way point, they couldn't expand beyond the front of the house. In other words, that complicated wording
That-
portion. Exactly.
That language there.
That language there. They could go either direction, but they just can't go too far is the simplest way to put it.
And I think part of this is for aesthetic reasons as well. You got the safety component, but all of a sudden, if you're allowing cars to be parking in front, and now you can have 4, 5, 6 cars, you're looking at the character of the neighborhood. You're looking at maybe the amount of hard pack or pavement now is there that you're losing pervious surface to help with, rainwater runoff and those types of things as well. And again, as some of these, houses, single-family duplexes get divided into more units, that just creates the demand for more cars and more parking, and we're seeing some of that creep occur in some of the neighborhoods right now.
And some of the requests that we've gotten for some of the, I'll say it, late 50s, early 60s homes in the urban core where they have a one-car garage and they don't have enough room for all the cars they want. So they're trying to widen out the driveway to fit more cars into it.
Anything else?
Nope, that's it for that one.
Okay, before I open it up to members of the committee, I'll open it up to the public. Is there any,
I'm Krista Larson, I'm the Assistant Public Works Director. How are you?
nice to meet you. Well, I'm going to open it up to the members of the public anyway. If anybody would like to come forward, now's the time. Sensing none. How about some input from you folks?
I believe this, and I read them before the meeting and was fine with both.
Okay,
I'm fine with both too, David.
okay. So,
The exception of your amendment, I think we can recommend both to the council at the next meeting.
So I guess I would entertain a motion to, with the comments that we've had tonight, send it back to Public Works to refine and finalize your recommendations consistent with what we've done. And then we'll figure out if we need another meeting.
So moved.
All right, I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is there any other business to come before the committee?
I do have a very short update, no decisions.
Since we've got you here, and we can't start the other meeting till 7, we thought we'd kind of go into the private roads and the maintenance part of it, which I know that Councilor
so-
Bounds was a part of.
So there is other business coming.
Well, we said as time was permitting, so we thought since there's 2 new counselors to this committee, 2 new counselors to the city council, who I'm sure have gotten bits and pieces of what was discussed during the past year on the private roads and the maintenance and stuff, we'd just use this as an opportunity to refresh, if you will, and just kind of bring everybody up to speed as to where we are today.
And one is I'm going to offer to the 2 new council members, at some point you want to sit down and go through this topic in detail, I'm more than happy to do it. It's a complicated process. I'm going to do a very, very brief primer tonight. And the simplest way to put it, state laws prohibits spending public money on private roads. We've been doing it for quite a few years. The key is that the whole drive in this train is how do roads become public? And there's really only 4 methods. Layout and return, which is an old process. Think of the 1700s, 1800s. You can still use it today, but that's when it was mostly done. Dedication and acceptance is the more common one you see now, where a developer develops a lot, lays out the road network, says this is where the road's going to be, and at the end of it, he's turning it over to us to accept, and we have a deed for that property that's now the road. The betterment process, which is the simplest way, is if someone can come in who has a private road, says, I want to become public, they pay for the cost to bring it up to our standards, and then we accept it at that point. And the last, which is very time constrained, is we can take it by prescription. But we would have to have maintained it for 20 consecutive years prior to 1968. And most of these roads that we have the issue is we can't determine that, and some of the documentations we found indicate that we weren't. So that's the basic primer. I'm more than happy to go over with the new council members on what we have found. What this document is we've been spending about, I want to say, a year really concentrating over the winter times, doing all the research on the streets. The first section is all those ones that we haven't got to. We haven't done it in depth, but we have found some documents. For example, Hadley Road, the 3rd one from the bottom. We found the planning board meetings that discussed it, and at that point, the person who was redeveloping the lot into 2 lots stated it was a private road. We haven't checked the deeds or anything yet, but that's what we've got left to do that. But that's one example. If you go to the very top of what would be page 3, you can start seeing the green blocks on the left. Those are ones that we have finished the research on, and the attorney has reviewed it and concurred with our analysis of what the status of those roads are. 2 of the roads, Channel and Hayes, were basically our right to pass and repass, where the property owners behind the property have a right to cross the other person's property to get to their property. The majority are private roads, where some have been developed, but the developer never finished it to the point where they were prepared to turn it over to us. And others were ones where we're not quite sure if the developer ever intended to be public or never got to the point. And you'll see that with,
I'm looking at the page that starts with Channel Lane and
Correct.
ends with Lucerne Avenue. Am I looking at the right page?
you're looking at the right page.
Okay.
So all those ones on the left with the green, those are all the ones that we have finished the research and the attorney has agreed to. As you go down that, you'll see there's some waiting on attorney's reviews. We finished our research, but we haven't got the analysis back from the attorney. Lucerne Avenue, I'll just use this one as an example. It's actually a private road that was in the documents that way, and they had an organization or a system set up to get a fee for maintenance for everybody who is on either side of that property. Of course, we own one side of that property. Hillcrest is a case where the planning board had stated in the conditions that for the city to accept it, both Phase 1 and Phase 2 had to be ready and had to be in conditions such that it accepted. The developer never got to the point where Phase 2 of it was ready for acceptance. If you go over to the next page,
Before you do that.
yeah,
Can you explain Taylor Home to me?
okay.
I read that the city was, the planning board required that it be conveyed, and Taylor Home
Didn't.
refuses, or,
No, basically a case of they never did the paperwork, and we were in the process of cleaning up, recognized that cul-de-sac at the end of Cottonwood,
yep.
yes, Cottonwood, had never been transferred over to us. I initiated the conversation to get the deed going, and that sort of sparked their interest, and they have a plan to add more cottages, as they call it, up in that area. So they would like to get that property back. They're going to have to go to the planning board to change the planning board conditions such that they can retain it.
So if we were to go through that process with the Taylor community and go through the planning board and make sure everyone's on board, we would still have the appropriate area at that cul-de-sac in Cottonwood for us to go and plow the public street and take care of the existing property owners and be able to turn around and
So
maneuver
you're
in
talking
there.
about the cul-de-sac at
Just the
end?
cul-de-sac.
Just at the end, we
Right.
would still ascertain the ability to go through and maintain for our other residents up there. And all of a sudden, wouldn't become private, and those houses right at the end wouldn't all of a sudden be subject to a private entity maintaining that area.
Yeah.
So that would be part of any planning
Planning
board
board action.
process on where the control lay with that.
Their intent, although it's just between their facility director and myself talking, is to construct a new turnaround mechanism for us, but do it in such a way as it doesn't cut off any of the two properties that are at the end of it.
And just as a side note, our structured payment with the Taylor community for payment in lieu of taxes is done to number of residences and occupancy levels. So certainly if they were to add on additional cottages and increase revenue and increase number of residents living there, that would also increase their pilot payment to the city. So there is some benefit for them adding there an additional payment to the city as well.
Hey, Wes, is there a time frame that, all these say on this page, city plowed and maintained, is there a time frame? That they've either got to be accepted or the city's going to just bow out?
We have found letters back from the 60s and early 70s asking that same question that you just asked. And we cannot find anything where the council came up with anything and said, you had so many years or whatever, or we bowed out. Some of the roads we've declared as emergency lanes, which we can spend limited dollars on it to keep it open enough so our emergency vehicles can use it safely. We could use that, and that's not here, for discussion for tonight. That's just one option. But realistically, just from a standpoint, declaring an emergency lane doesn't change its status. It is still a private road, and we get money from the state for how many miles of public highways that we maintain. We would not get a single dollar for these private roads, even if we declared an emergency lane for maintaining them.
I guess my question is, if it's a private road, it's a private road.
Right. Correct.
And I think the conversation we had with the council all through the last year is that if we come to that determination with full council input, full public input opportunities, our desire is to give ample notice to folks of when maintenance would end on that road. So there's an opportunity for them to get organized if it's a homeowners association, because some of these do have some homeowners associations in place, not most of them, but a couple of them do. Some of them may look at the Betterment District and want to get organized and bring it up to speed. We did one on Phoenician Way out heading towards the Humane Society. It's one of the last streets before you cross over into Meredith. That was a situation where a developer did not complete that subdivision, and the road was always intended to be a public road. It lay for a while, so the funds that we held in escrow weren't enough to complete the project because during the downturn in the economy, it lay fallow for a period of years. So that neighborhood petitioned and agreed to come in, the city used what funds we had remaining in the escrow. The residents were responsible for the remainder of that, but we brought that road up to the standards of accepting it as a public street. And there is a lien tied to the betterment assessment that's tied to their tax bill for a period of X years, and the city's allowed to set a very reasonable interest rate. And the people just pay it off as, say, an added small payment to their property tax payment once a year. So those mechanisms can be in place, too, if a neighborhood chooses to want to go that way.
Is that the same mechanism you described in the retaining wall scenario?
For that case-by-case on a hardship for an individual, we would look to maybe do something there and do a lien subject to a payment schedule type of thing. But that was a neighborhood coming together. So there may be a few of those that we want to identify and work with folks if their desire is to have their road accepted as a city street. But certainly we want to know that it's in a decent construction condition before we accept it as a city street, so we're not picking up projects right away.
At what point, is there a liability that the city's equipment is on a private road?
If we declare it an emergency lane, the liability somewhat goes away.
Okay.
As long as it's still not declared an emergency lane, we have liability. And that's part of the process that
Just so you'll know, the city didn't go chasing down this problem.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah, we got notice from the insurance company that there was an issue here. And a lot of communities in New Hampshire have that same problem in terms of maintaining historically for years private roads, so.
I worked for the town of Meredith. I understand they had plenty of those.
Okay. Well, I'm just making sure.
There's another community in our region, let's say, who has a significant number of these private roads that they've been maintaining for the winter maintenance. They weren't doing anything in the summer. And they actually went through a public process within the last year and had a very large public hearing with all of these roads identified. And the language in the state statute for declaring something as an emergency lane says there has to be and I'm paraphrasing, says there has to be a benefit to the greater public than just those folks who abut on the street. So it's not just we want to do it because we want to be a good, municipal government. It's what's the benefit that's greater to the greater good of the community. And this community basically indicated that by not maintaining these roads in the winter to be able to access a lot of seasonal properties down there, there was a risk of not being able to get fire apparatus down in an emergency, and the loss of that construction value if a large fire were to occur and this value disappeared off of their tax rolls could be a significant detriment to the community, and therefore it was the public benefit to keep the roads cleared so that emergency vehicles could access.
Yes.
And they kind of passed the straight face test on that and held their public hearings and had a number of them declared emergency lanes. But that's what the statute reads. It has to be for a greater benefit. So the ones that we did declare back in the fall, they were in a lot of cases connector roads, or they accessed maybe some city pump stations or infrastructure that we had a vested interest in being able to get to in an emergency type of situation.
Turkey Street in Addison was one of them, I'm fully aware.
Is this the final list? Are we missing any roads here?
These are the ones that we know of. Cottonwood at the end was just added because we just found out there was an issue there. So I wouldn't say that we would not be surprised again and find another one on it, but these are the ones that we've purged through and we know we have issues on.
And these are the recent updates with some of the research and some of the attorney's comments. So again, more for an FYI tonight to bring you up to where we are with the list and their status.
Well, this is going to eventually come before the council.
Correct. This is just to update you, to get you, because we're going to have to come back to this committee with an action request, then to go to council. I just wanted to preset the stage to get your minds thinking about it again.
Okay. So, sorry to interrupt. Finish.
There's a couple of ones that I want to point out that we've learned. And it's basically by type. And you'll see it with the Methodist Campground ones, Allen Baker, and the Colonial Plantation Heritage. We have actually found either a person or a company that actually owns the road underneath it. So we're going to have to do something about that through some process to actually work that issue. what that happens to be at this point, we haven't gone that far yet. But
Which ones are you talking about?
if you go to, it would be the back, be page 4. Look, as you come down, you'll see a very large green section. It says Methodist Campground. Do you find it, sir?
Actually, it's on the, no,
Page 4 for me starts with Pendleton Beach Road.
go to the bottom of the same thing in the
Hey,
green,
right.
starting with Haven, or a little bit farther way down. It says Allen,
Allen.
Baker, Epworth, Fisk. Those are all the ones down out in the
Okay,
weirs in
okay.
the
All right.
Methodist campground.
So we have researched at the point that we've determined that the roads were actually sold to an organization called Wood Fibers Incorporated. And then in Colonial Plantation and Heritage, the research determined that through the process, there are two individuals who live in Connecticut who have effectively bought the roads in the Colonial Plantation and Heritage subdivision.
Okay.
So those are issues that we're going to have to work through as part of this process. It was really more of an update. If you have any other questions.
Some of these are so old, though. It occurs to me that people are gonna, sort of like adverse possession. Does that make any sense, Counsel?
That's what they call prescription.
Okay.
Okay.
There was bound to be a word for it.
No,
So,
that makes sense. I think that's been explored as best it can be done. But the problem is that we don't have the records that can demonstrate 20 years prior to, what is 68, right? So we can't get back to 1948.
But if you're one of those folks, you're sitting there saying, is that my fault?
Right.
And I'm
That's-
asking
That's
not.
exactly right. That's the dilemma. You have identified the dilemma.
Okay.
Because people have come in here and thought that what we were doing was trying to take away their driveways and their roads. And it's been difficult to explain to them just exactly why this process was started and what we're trying to do.
I understand the
Because,
start of it.
you know, if you've been plowing a road for 20 years and then you tell the person that's sitting at the end of that road that you're not gonna plow it anymore, you better have a really good explanation.
Well, and if they bought it 15 years ago, you know, they've never known anything
Then
but.
they've never known
Yeah.
anything but. So, we're working on a good explanation.
we have found one document, it's a council meeting minutes from 1949, where in that year, because of a housing shortage, they allowed the Director of Public Works at his own discretion to plow private lands to give some more housing, make some more housing available. That's the very first record that we have found.
Gotta find him.
So we've got more at the attorney's office getting reviewed, so we can put this together. And the next step for us is develop the plan after those results and come back.
I think it's ironic that 49 is the year of my birth. I think that's ironic.
We have knocked several off the list because we did find the documentation for it. Lane Road, which is basically crosses from Meredith Center to Parade.
Yep.
It was actually, you had to look at the documents for Eastman. It was actually part of Eastman at that time, so that solved that problem. We got lucky on Tremont Street in that we found a map that had the house names on it at that time, because it doesn't go by street address, it goes by who owned the house. And we found an unnamed road in our records that the house names and the descriptions matched the other map that we found, so we were able to take that one off the list too.
I'm just amazed that Tremont Street was on the list. I was, you know, I grew up running up and down that road.
Just,
A lot of work here.
yes. Pickerel Pond, just because there's some interest on that one, I do have to bring it up. We have found a bunch of maps for it, but the house names on it don't match some of the descriptions that we found. So we're still in the process of trying to work that one. That one's going to be a tough one, but we have not found enough documentation of the right age to indicate if it was an accepted road or just an old range road that was a farmer's road. Just haven't got there yet.
Just paved it a few years ago.
Subject to your questions, again, there's no action on this tonight. This is just to get our mind back into the issue.
Okay. Are you looking for us to schedule another meeting, or are you still working on this, and when you're ready, you let us know?
It'd be a case of ready, we'll let you know.
Okay.
I'm waiting, basically, we're finished for any more research for the winter. We're now in the mode where we're busy doing projects for the summertime. So we're gonna wrap up the last pieces to it. Then, after our attorney looks at the current ones, we'll come back to the committee.
And just one other footnote, we did try to look into a legislative fix for this because we know that it impacts other communities. And our attorneys, the Mitchell Group, only do municipal law, and within the New Hampshire Bar, there's a small municipal subcommittee or working group that meets regularly to discuss interesting items. And our attorneys brought this to that municipal subcommittee, to other municipal attorneys, and said, what can we do? And basically the response back was a lot of these RSAs on streets and public roads and whatever are so intertwined that to try to do a legislative fix was going to probably cause untold harm and undetermined harm on things that you're impacting other existing laws on, that it would be almost impossible to do because they were so intertwined. So.
I was disappointed that was their position, because it seemed to me that just passing legislation that addresses this problem omnibus across the state was the easy way to go. Now, because we can't go the easy way, every community is investing lots of time and money trying to correct the issue on the local level.
Well, it's a perfect segue. We have our legislative delegation coming in this evening.
Okay. Yeah, let's bring it up with them.
Luck, Wes.
Okay, now I'm going to ask the question. Any further business to come before the
Not for
committee?
me, sir.
Bob, did you want to say something, or you're just getting up?
No, I'm gonna do the shade for you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.